It was a bright Tuesday afternoon when Marcus Bennett left the dealership in his newly polished Aston Martin. His heart swelled with pride as he slid behind the wheel, feeling the smooth leather beneath his hands. Marcus was no stranger to success. He had worked his way up from humble beginnings to now owning one of the largest luxury car dealerships in the city. But for Marcus, today wasn't just about flaunting his success. It was a well-deserved moment of reflection. Marcus had grown up in a modest neighborhood where money was scarce, but dreams were abundant. His parents had instilled in him a strong work ethic, teaching him the value of perseverance. From a young age, Marcus had been fascinated by cars. He would spend hours reading about them, tinkering with anything mechanical, and dreaming of a day when he would own his very own. As he cruised down the highway, his thoughts drifted to those early years, where every turn was an uphill battle. He had faced endless hurdles, from racial stereotypes to financial struggles, but Marcus had never let anything stand in his way. Today, sitting behind the wheel of his Aston Martin, he was living proof that hard work pays off. He turned the dial on the stereo, letting the music flow through the car's sound system as he admired the way the sun bounced off the hood of the car. The highway stretched ahead like a smooth ribbon, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. That is, until he noticed the flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. A police cruiser was tailing him. Marcus frowned, glancing at the speedometer. He wasn't speeding, nor had he violated any traffic rules. Why was he being pulled over? Pulling to the side of the road, Marcus watched as the officer approached his car. It was something he had grown accustomed to. Being a black man in a luxury car seemed to raise suspicions more often than not. The officer, a burly middle-aged man with a stern expression, tapped on Marcus's window. Marcus rolled it down slowly, feeling the weight of the moment. His heart raced, not from fear, but from the all-too-familiar frustration that came with these encounters. License and registration, the officer barked, not even making eye contact. Marcus kept his hands visible, the advice he had been given time and time again. He moved deliberately, retrieving his license from his wallet and the registration from the glove compartment. The officer watched every move closely, his hand resting on his holster. Marcus could feel the tension in the air. "What's the problem, officer?" Marcus asked calmly, handing over the documents. "You were swerving," the officer replied curtly, finally looking Marcus in the eye. There was a flicker of something, surprise maybe, that crossed the officer's face as he took in the sight of Marcus in his tailored suit, driving a car worth more than the officer likely made in a year. "I wasn't swerving," Marcus replied, his voice steady but firm. He knew better than to argue, but he also wasn't going to sit there and take unwarranted accusations. "We'll see," the officer said, walking back to his cruiser with Marcus's documents. Marcus sighed, leaning back in his seat. He had been here before, stopped for no reason, treated like a criminal before any crime had been committed. It was a cycle he had seen repeated in the lives of so many black men, a routine interrogation that often stemmed from one thing: the color of his skin. As Marcus waited, his mind wandered to the dealership he had worked so hard to build. Bennett Automotive wasn't just a business. It was a testament to everything he had overcome. Located in the heart of the city, the dealership catered to a high-end clientele, celebrities, athletes, and successful business people, many of whom looked like him. It was a place where Marcus had proven that he belonged in the upper echelons of success, despite the prejudices that tried to keep him down. The officer returned, looking over Marcus's documents with a raised eyebrow. "What are you doing in a car like this?" he asked, suspicion lacing his voice. Marcus knew where this was going, but he kept his composure. "I own it," he replied simply. The officer scoffed, clearly not believing him. "Right? And where do you work?" Marcus resisted the urge to roll his eyes. He could tell the officer was fishing for an excuse to escalate the situation. "I own Bennett Automotive, the dealership downtown. This is one of my cars." For a moment, the officer looked taken aback. He shifted uncomfortably, clearly not expecting that response. "Bennett Automotive? The luxury car dealership?" Marcus nodded, watching the officer's expression change from skepticism to confusion. The officer hesitated, as if trying to reconcile the image of a black man in a luxury car with the idea that he could be a successful business owner. Marcus had seen that look many times before, the struggle to accept that his success was real, that he had defied the stereotypes society often placed on him. "What do you sell there?" the officer asked, still probing. "Cars like this one," Marcus said calmly. "Luxury cars." There was an awkward silence as the officer processed this. It was clear that his initial assumptions had been wrong, but instead of apologizing or backing down, the officer seemed to double down on his authority. "You got a nice car," he said, his tone begrudgingly respectful. "But I'm still going to have to run your information." Marcus bit back a sigh of frustration. "Do what you have to do," he replied, knowing full well that everything would come back clean. He had worked too hard to let moments like this shake him, but that didn't make them any less exhausting. As the officer returned to his cruiser, Marcus's thoughts drifted again. He had spent years building his business, fighting against every stereotype and preconceived notion about who he was and what he was capable of. Even now, with a thriving dealership, he faced moments like this, moments where he was reminded that, to some people, his success didn't fit their narrative. When the officer returned, he handed Marcus's documents back without a word. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the mistake, just the lingering tension of an encounter that had gone on too long. "You're free to go," the officer said, his voice gruff. Marcus nodded, taking the documents and sliding them back into the glove compartment. He didn't say anything more as he rolled up the window and pulled back onto the road. He wasn't looking for an apology. He had learned long ago that it wasn't worth expecting. As he drove away, Marcus's mind was still racing. He couldn't help but think about the thousands of black men who had been in his position. Men who hadn't been as fortunate, who hadn't had the resources or the reputation to protect them from situations that could have easily spiraled out of control. Marcus knew that his success afforded him a certain level of protection, but it didn't shield him from the everyday racism that permeated society. The next day, Marcus arrived at the dealership earlier than usual. He had meetings lined up with a few high-profile clients, and he wanted everything to be perfect. As he walked through the showroom, he couldn't help but smile. The polished floors, the gleaming cars on display, the hum of activity, it was all a testament to how far he had come. He was about to head to his office when he noticed a familiar face in the waiting area. It was the officer from the previous day, looking uncomfortable and out of place. Marcus walked over, raising an eyebrow. "Can I help you?" The officer stood up, shifting awkwardly. I'm here to look at a car," he said, clearly struggling with the situation. Marcus crossed his arms, studying the officer for a moment. He could see the embarrassment in the man's face, the realization that he had misjudged Marcus based on his own prejudices. "Well," Marcus said, a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth, "you've come to the right place. Let me show you around." As Marcus walked the officer through the dealership, explaining the features of the various luxury cars, he couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge or proving a point. It was about showing that success and respectability didn't have a color. By the end of the tour, the officer was visibly more relaxed, even appreciative. He had come in looking for a car, but he had found something more, a lesson in humility, a reminder that the world was bigger than his assumptions. Marcus shook the officer's hand as he left the dealership, feeling a strange sense of closure. The encounter on the highway had been just another reminder of the challenges he still faced. But today, in the dealership he had built from the ground up, Marcus felt the weight of those challenges lift, even if only for a moment. As he watched the officer drive away, Marcus smiled to himself. He had faced adversity at every turn, but he had always come out on top. Today was no different.